By now you'd have already heard about The Idol. It's the new show from the creator of Euphoria, Sam Levinson, and The Weeknd. Now, if you've ever browsed my channel before, you'll know that I've made popular videos on both of them. So the prospect of these two collaborating had my attention. Not just because of all the views I was hoping to get on this video. Please like and subscribe. Anyway, knowing who the creators were was all I really needed to be excited for this show. I'd heard that it was being panned by critics at the Cannes Film Festival. I'd also heard rumours of its troubled production, which felt like history repeating itself after similar rumours plagued the release of Euphoria Season 2. However, prior to watching the show, I didn't read up on any of this, because I wanted to go in blind and take it at face value. So to preface, that's what this video is, my analysis of The Idol as a piece of media. I won't be going into heavy detail about any of the drama surrounding the show. There's plenty of other creators who've already covered that. What I will say is this. It's upsetting that the original director of the show, Amy Seimetz, had all of her work scrapped by HBO, even after shooting 80% of it. It's scary that a studio can do that, and I'm glad that it hasn't flown under the radar. Yes, she was probably given a decent severance package, but there's no amount of money you can pay an artist to not finish something they've put their everything into. That said, I still think it's unfair to hold this against the show that we did end up getting. There's plenty of cast and crew members who had nothing to do with that decision, who deserve to have their work judged fairly. With that out of the way, The Idol is a mess. Now, I don't think it's quite as bad as the discourse surrounding it would have you believe. I mean, there are YouTubers literally calling this the worst show ever made. Okay, these people clearly haven't watched the later seasons of Riverdale. And I get it, to get attention on this platform, you either have to say something is a 10 out of 10 masterpiece, or it's the worst thing you've ever seen and a violation of your human rights. The show is not that awful, but you're never going to see a video go viral with a title like, The Idol is just okay. Granted, it's not great. It's not even good. It's below average. There's plot threads that are forgotten about, it's repetitive, the story is spread thin across 5 episodes, and for all of its edgy posturing, it's ultimately very anticlimactic. But by that same token, there are good performances. It has a very distinctive look. There's some good exchanges of dialogue. It's funny. Like this scene.
Let me catch you looking at her again.
I'm sorry,
Let
I'm
me
not
fucking
sure.
catch you looking at her again. I'll fucking drag you down Rodeo while your fucking ass just fucking...
Clearly the joke is that The Weeknd is tiny and he's trying to intimidate this worker who's just minding his own business. Anyway, this review is going to have 2 sections. What I liked and what I didn't like. It's that simple. Let's get into it. The performances. Now, the characters are thinly written. I'll get into this in the next section, but I mean, come on. You've got Hank Azaria in the show. That's at least got to count for something. If you've ever seen the movie The Birdcage, he's hilarious in that. He also voices nearly every side character on The Simpsons, and he's this guy in Heat.
Why'd I get mixed up with that bitch?
Cause she got a great ass!
He's just a very funny actor, and he lends a lot of charisma to his role, even though it's a pretty one-dimensional part. He's basically the manager who's nice to Jocelyn, whereas the others are a bit more shady. In particular, I really like the scene at the start of episode 2 where he comforts Joss after she gets told off by a label executive. He has such a warm presence, and I bought that he was someone who's probably seen Joss grow up in the spotlight and has tried to protect her. Then there's Lily Rose Depp, who does the best she can with the material. I liked how the opening scene of episode 1 gave a look into what it would be like to be a famous singer, having all these people in your orbit leeching off you. It showed how you're not simply a person anymore, but a brand, a business. There's a Vanity Fair writer trying to get a headline, there's managers in the background. There's suspense with all those managers trying to hide from Joss the news of this explicit photo being leaked. I might as well talk about the elephant in the room, The Weeknd, who's received a lot of criticism for his performance. The most common being that he's just playing himself, and that therefore he's a terrible actor. Now, call it a vanity project, call it what you will. He's a creator of the show, and clearly the role of Tedros is meant to be a darker version of The Weeknd's real-life personality. That's why there's so much of his own music playing throughout the show. If this was meant to be Weeknd transforming into a completely foreign role, there wouldn't be all those music cues. There's also several mentions of Prince throughout the show, who also wrote, directed, and starred in his own movies back in the 80s and 90s. These weren't particularly well received, but I think that's what The Idol was going for. He has moments here that are actually pretty funny, especially at the start of episode 3, and I was laughing with the show in those moments. Now sure, there are some scenes particularly in episode 2 and also towards the end of the season that are way too over the top and campy. But it's not this Tommy Wiseau level performance. There have been much worse performances by celebrities. Much, much worse. the cinematography. Are the shots in The Idol as profound as something out of a Kubrick movie, or even an episode of The Sopranos or Mr. Robot? No. I didn't pick up on much imagery and subtext to pull apart from individual frames. In fact, most of the symbolism in the show is pretty on the nose. Like in episode 1 when Jocelyn wears the red blind. Clearly it's hinting at Little Red Riding Hood, which is later confirmed in episode 5. Or in episode 2 when there's puppets in Tedros' house. I don't think I even need to explain that one. But what it has going for it is it has a distinctive look. A lot of movies and TV shows come out with this almost clinical grey look from shooting digital. Not that digital filmmaking is inherently bad, but I appreciate that you can see the imperfections in the film stock in The Idol. It adds to the grungy atmosphere that the show is going for. Whilst it isn't as exuberant as Euphoria, I actually like that the cinematography is a lot more subtle here. Especially in season 2 of that show, there was so much going on visually that it distracted from the characters. I also think that Sam Levinson has come into his own much more as a director. Euphoria is clearly so inspired by the early movies of Paul Thomas Anderson, like Boogie Nights and Magnolia. I mean, the carnival episode in season 1 completely rips off Magnolia. Everything from the score to the camera movements to the way the characters intersect. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is The Idol looks great. And maybe it's just for aesthetics. Maybe it's completely superficial, but clearly a lot of effort was put into it and it deserves praise. The dialogue. I think there's some really compelling moments of interaction between the characters, especially in episodes 3 and 4. For example, the scene where Tedros and Joss are arguing over dinner why she hasn't been as creative since her mother passed away. Sure, the scene is technically ruined by the stupid plot twist that happens in episode 5, which reveals that Joss actually wasn't abused by her mum. But I didn't know about that when I watched episode 3, so the conflict felt palpable. Another highlight in episode 3 was when Hank Azaria and Davine Joy Randolph were talking to Tedros about how he got involved with Joss and his backstory and everything. I liked how that was written, because you know that they're trying to read him and that they're trying to get a grasp on what he's planning to do with Joss, but everything they're actually saying is just chit-chat. It's a credit to the actors that they were able to get that across purely through non-verbal communication. Furthermore, there's some good moments of humour, like in episode 5 when the managers all show up to listen to Joss's new music, and Eli Roth is like,
"No, this is weird even by music business standards. What the fuck is this?"
I also thought there were a few moments that were effective in hinting at the darkness of Hollywood. There's a part in episode 4 when you have all these music industry people in a boardroom talking to Jenny's character, and one of them is like, "We'll get you boosts in the algorithm on Spotify." That's clearly a commentary on payola and how these record labels pull strings behind the scenes to manufacture artists. As a final note to cap off this section, overall I found the show entertaining. The only time I lost interest was in episode 2. I wasn't bored much at all, which is realistically the worst thing a piece of media can do. What I didn't like. The show is very, very repetitive. The whole relationship between Tedros and Jocelyn goes around in circles. At the end of episode 1, Joss invites Tedros over to her house. They bond and make music together. But then when we get to the end of episode 2, it finishes in exactly the same place. In that episode, we do get to learn more about Joss's mental state. We see her struggle through filming that music video. But the way the show handles her mental health is very surface level. You always hear about show don't tell as the golden rule of writing. And truthfully, there are times when all you can do is tell, or telling can be more effective. But in The Idol, episode 1 is filled with exposition about Joss having a nervous breakdown, and we see hints of that in episode 2. But then for the rest of the show, it's pretty much completely forgotten about. By the end of the season, it's like, oh, she just cured her mental illness, because it's never brought up again. Similarly, the plot thread with Joss's friend, who's played by real-life pop star Jenny, goes nowhere. It's set up in episode 4 that the record label is giving her Joss's song. The implication is that they're trying to replace her. But then in episode 5, the record label just decides to give Joss the song back after they come over to her house. It's such an inconsequential subplot. I have no idea why it was included. The show is playing into these classic archetypes, the Hollywood star, the mysterious love interest. But the characters aren't coloured in and brought to life realistically. For example, I never once believed that Joss was once this child star who went from rags to riches and garnered this huge fandom. I was never shown how she's actually foreign to this world of fame and fortune. I never understood why she would be popular in the first place, why she is the idol. The show doesn't feel lived in. I don't get the sense that there's any lore to these characters outside these 5 episodes. It's the same thing with the performances from Tedros' cult members in episode 5. The managers are telling us how talented and amazing they are, but I wasn't that impressed. It's a really hard thing to do to convince an audience that a character is musically talented. That's one of the reasons why so many music biopics are forgettable, because often the actors simply mimic the real life artist, but in doing so, they fail to capture the spark that made that person special. It feels cheap. With Joss, we learn in episode 1 that her mum died recently, that she has mental health issues, and that she's struggling to make an album and at risk of losing her career. All of that is interesting setup, but her character development is spread thin. Jocelyn is clearly a play on celebrities like Britney Spears, Selena Gomez, and Jeanette McCurdy, the former child star who's entered adulthood with scars, who also may have grown up with abusive parents. This is actually a theme that was tackled way better in Magnolia. That said, it would have been interesting to see it covered from a female perspective. However, unfortunately, Joss never steps out of the shadow of her very famous real-life inspirations, and she winds up feeling like a bit of a caricature. We never really get to know who she is as a person, a human being. The Idol is a show that has all these themes, all this satire, but it's not a character piece. The writers didn't craft these interesting ideas into real people with nuance. A satire with two-dimensional characters can work, but this isn't just a comedy, it's first and foremost a drama, and it's going for a serious tone. Similarly, Tedros doesn't go beyond what we expect of him from his first scene in episode 1. Not even his first scene, I mean just look at this poster. Who do you think this guy is? And whilst I understand why Joss initially becomes interested in him, the two actors don't share much chemistry at all, and the relationship ends up feeling forced. The plot twist. By far the worst mistake the show makes happens right at the end of episode 5, and this is for me what takes it from being okay to below average. The twist reveal with Jocelyn, that she's been lying about how she was abused by her mum as a child, and that she's been using this to boost her fame. This twist is so stupid, because it makes a lot of the really good scenes in the show entirely redundant. And the worst thing is, it isn't set up at all. It comes out of nowhere, because there was nothing in the earlier episodes hinting at this reveal. Of course there are movies that have last minute twists that make you rethink the whole story, like in Fight Club. But in that movie, there are so many hints, and you've already seen how Edward Norton's character has issues, so it makes sense and it instantly clicks. If we found out in episode 3 that she was a more sinister character, this maybe could have been pulled off, because you would have time to flesh her out more. But because it comes really late in the show, I have to rethink Joss's entire character. And it's not satisfying because we were never clued into this reveal. The theme the show is getting at with this twist is the idea of artists using trauma to create great art. However, the way it's executed, it comes across as rushed and pretentious. It's anticlimactic. So like I said, for the most part, I found the show entertaining. But by the time you get to episode 5, you're watching 3 full performances from characters you barely know. The cult members who turn out to be amazing musicians. The scene goes on for at least 30 minutes, with Joss's managers just sitting there, admiring how good these performances are. And it's like, we get it. In a movie, that scene would have been 10-15 minutes long at most. But because it's a show, it has to be stretched out. Which leads me to my next point, which is whilst the show feels spread thin, it has themes that could be dense. But by the time we reach episode 5, the show goes out with a fizzle. You're constantly told in each episode that Joss's career is on the line, but we never really understand what that means, what the consequences will be for her if she doesn't make a hit song. There aren't any stakes established. A good example of creating high stakes was in a movie I watched recently, A Few Good Men. It's a courtroom drama written by Aaron Sorkin and starring Tom Cruise. Basically, it's established in the middle of the film that if Cruise interrogates a witness played by Jack Nicholson, and he fails to find any new evidence, not only will his clients go to jail, but he'll lose his reputation and will never be able to get another job as a lawyer. So when we enter the final act, the tension is thick because we know exactly what the consequences are. However, in The Idol, we don't know what happens if Joss fails. Most of the show, we're just watching her make music and living the life. Nothing ever gets taken away from her. So why should I care? At the end of episode 5, Joss's managers are at the stadium talking about how this could have gone horribly wrong. But I never got the sense that Joss was in any real danger of actually losing her career. For all the nudity, the storyline is so tame, and it never really goes to any truly dark places. So yeah, I'm disappointed by The Idol. I don't think it's a horrible piece of trash, but it's nowhere near as thematically brilliant as it's trying to be. There are scenes here that I would have wanted to revisit, but because of that twist, I just don't see the point. I would probably rate the show a 4 or 5 out of 10, leaning more towards a 4 the more I talk about it. Now, you might think that's a really harsh score, but no, it's not a 1 out of 10. A 1 out of 10 is Justice League, where the comedy always falls flat and feels forced. The performances are awful, it has dull cinematography, it's boring. That's a 1 out of 10. The Idol is not Justice League. It's on the level of something like Don't Look Up, where it's passable fluff that I'll probably forget as soon as I finish editing this video. And I'm not reveling in that. I was excited for the show mainly because The Weeknd is a movie buff. If you look at his music videos, there's references to Scorsese, Tarkovsky, PTA, Hitchcock. Even the whole aesthetic of Kissland is heavily inspired by David Cronenberg, who's a legendary horror director from Canada. He knows his stuff. I always found that an interesting part of his artistry. But to see this show fall so far below those inspirations kinda sucks. I didn't expect this to be as great as Blade Runner, but at least on the level of Euphoria Season 1. Oh, I almost forgot, the soundtrack. It's mostly pretty forgettable, but the highlights for me were definitely Popular with Cardi and Madonna, and then Weeknd's cover of Jealous Guy. Okay, before I head out, I just wanted to say a quick thank you for watching the video. Make sure to let me know what you thought about The Idol, and also what video you'd like to see from me next. Anyways, have a good one.